Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hamilton Report. Today is January the 10th, 2022, the year that we intend to make Oklahoma more blue. Bluer in 22 is what we're all working for. And before we get into tonight's topic, two things I want to remind you of that if you are not registered or if you're not sure if you're registered to vote, you only have until this Friday to be able to vote in February's elections. There are elections all over the state, different times this year. But if you plan on voting in a municipal election in February, it's critical that you make sure that you are registered to vote. And while you're out there, I'm going to strongly encourage you to please request your absentee ballot because we don't know what the year holds ahead. And this is just a very easy way for you to make sure that your vote gets counted. It's also a great way because you get it about 3 weeks before the election. And it's a great way to know what's on the ballot so you have time to research issues and candidates. And I hope that you will take advantage of that. I said a couple of things. Those were two, but one more. I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to thank you for being with us this evening and for the support that we get from our viewers. I'm constantly amazed at the great, kind comments that we receive for this broadcast because it means that we are doing what we set out to do, which is to provide you with information that simply isn't available other places, looking at issues a little more deeply than can be done in an evening news broadcast, for example, and certainly with the eyes of a Democrat on that. So I want to thank you for your continued viewing of this program and for the ways that you continue to interact with us, letting us know what you need, what you want, and then allowing us to provide that for you. Tonight's topic is one of deep personal interest to me. While I don't have children, I'm very much concerned about education in Oklahoma because especially as I get older, I recognize that the young people today are going to be the ones who will be physicians and home health care aides and nurses and attorneys who will be taking care of people like me as I get older as well. And if they are not educated well, they're not afforded a well-rounded, quality, free education, then we are doing a disservice not just to our children, but also to everyone in the state of Oklahoma, because it really would doom our future if we don't take action now to bolster our support for public education. Sadly, that's not what our Republican supermajority is looking to do. They're not looking to support education. They are looking to get involved in things they have no business being involved in. And we're going to be talking about that tonight with my guest. It's always a pleasure to welcome back to this broadcast Toby Jenkins. He is the CEO and Executive Director of the Dennis R. Neal Equality Center and Oklahomans for Equality in Tulsa. Toby, this is by no means your first time on this broadcast, but it's always a pleasure to welcome you back. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's an honor. And it's always nice to be able to connect with individuals who are trying to make Oklahoma better for everybody.
And that's, that's something that our chair talks about a lot, that we all can do that in different ways, big or small. But here is the topic tonight is one that is, like I said, it's very concerning to me. I truly, I guess, naively thought that Republicans were moving away from God, gays, and guns. I thought that they were actually moving toward more substantive legislation rather than just pandering to a base. Sadly, it looks to me like they have just fallen down a rabbit hole of cultural warfare, and they're right back in it now with God, guns, and gays. The number of firearm bills already is staggering. The number of so-called religious freedom bills dealing with COVID and masks and mandates. And it's staggering when you look at the amount of energy, time, and money that goes into this. But tonight I'm talking about two specifically, Senate Bill 1141 and Senate Bill 1142. I normally don't go too deep into bills on this broadcast, but this is one we need to pay attention to. Toby, these twin bills, um, in a nutshell, it says that any parent in a school can say, I don't want that book on the shelf if it deals with LGBT issues, if it deals with gender identity or expression, if it deals with sexual orientation. I don't want that in my school. And now understand that the way that this is written, it would cover kindergarten through 12th grade. It would require one parent in the school to say, I don't want this. And then they would have to provide that in writing. And then there are 30 days in which the librarian or the school official or the teacher has to remove those books from the shelf so their children won't have access to them. And then at 30 days, the offending, I'm using that word very loosely, offending teacher, librarian, school administrator who does not remove the book is subject to a fine of $10,000 a day and prohibited from being hired by any school in the state of Oklahoma for 2 years. Okay, Toby, what does that look like for you? Because I know when you and I were in junior high and high school, those formative years, we had no access to books that would talk about the things that were on our hearts, in our minds. And now we have finally progressed to a place where there's some fabulous resources out there for young people. And what's going to happen to our young people now if these books are all stripped away from them?
Well, this particular bill is extremely egregious because it's removing from our public school system resources that are so critical to our families. And it specifically is the parent finds out that the book is there and then can wade into that. Now, many times these students may be looking for resources and information because it's conversations they're not comfortable having yet because they themselves are not exactly clear. And so they're looking for resources in their own public libraries. Now, Scott, I just want to make you aware of something. You talked about how these books, they are available now, but maybe weren't available when you and I were younger. They were available. There just weren't enough. And the reason I know they were because in 1974, I marched into my high school library and I went up and I whispered to the librarian that did he have any books on homosexuality? And that librarian, I wish I knew his name, he found that book for me. And then I went and plopped down in the table out in front of everybody. And he walked over and he said, Toby, I want to move you back here so you have some privacy. And he moved me to a table towards the back of the library so I could read and find out that information. That was in 1974. That librarians and school teachers had an understanding that they were to be a place to educate and to inform. And that was in 1974. I don't even remember what the book was. But when I came out in 1995, it was because I was sitting in a Tulsa Public Library and there was a display case. And I do know who the librarian was there. Her name was Mary Lee Wadler. And she had decided, she reached out to PFLAG. She said, I want to feature books in our library, here in our public library, so that people know. And so she had this huge rainbow display. It was quite controversial. Lots of people were unhappy about it. But there I was, 1995. I walked in and I saw that. And there I found Stranger in the Gate. So me personally, my life has been impacted because a librarian knew there must be a resource for everybody. Opposing views, different thoughts, new information, different positions. And that's why the libraries, which are funded publicly by our tax dollars, are funded so that every thought is represented in the school. And so the fact that we're going to whistle for parents to be, um, you know, witch
Vigilantes.
burners and burn books, and that they can talk about a book that just, may have sexual content in it, and that they can demand that it be removed, and then turn our librarians into criminals.
Mhm.
That's how ridiculous and how overreaching. And nobody really will want to live in a world that exists like that, where educators and librarians and resource personnel have been turned into criminals.
Well, this is another example of legislators getting in the way of education and not forgetting LGBTQ kids for a moment. If a child, let's say a junior high school kid, has a friend that comes out to them as gay or bi or trans, where do they even go to find resources to help their friend if it's not available in the school, if it's not available in the library? And I see this as a horribly dangerous slope, because the next bill would require that every school have a King James interpretation of the Bible, the King James translation. And if a class is being taught on Bible, or I love this one, on Hebrew, they must use the King James Bible as their basic text. Now, how in the world can you use the King James Bible, which is an English translation, to teach Hebrew? It's nonsense. And that's what we're dealing with here, is pure nonsense. Now, let's talk a minute. You're a person of faith. I'm a person of faith, but I'll be the first one to tell you that once you get into the King James version of the Bible, there's some pretty interesting sexual stories that are told in
Yeah.
that book. There
Yeah.
are some very graphic depictions of punishment and what can and should happen to individuals. And so if I said, gee, this is too much violence, I don't want my kid exposed to this, I can't have that book removed. I can't have any book removed except for those that have been prescribed in this law. It's wrong. Now, let me ask you this. How often do you encounter young people who are just simply confused? Confused about where life is for them right now, confused about their sexual orientation, or unclear of what any of this means as their hormones rage. How often do you meet kids like that?
Well, every day. Today I was working with a family who are in a rural school district. The mother called. She has a transgender child, and that transgender child is already trying on different pronouns and kind of different identities. And they said, we're just a little bit concerned that they keep changing. And I said, it's a part of their development. You see, children, all of us in our development, we had different styles of music. We had different opinions and different thoughts and different abilities, athletic abilities, music abilities, because we're still developing. What we are dealing with as legislators who want to stop the development, the human development, and that is what our schools are to be, to continue to help us develop and understand who we are. And a part of your independence and what a parent wants their child is to be self reliant. They want their child to be successful without their dependence, and a part of that is that child develops their own sense of identity. They may decide to go to a different house of worship. They may decide to marry somebody that your parents don't necessarily care for, but they're going to tolerate because they know that person makes you happy. And they know that there's a possibility that grandkids will be a part of the negotiation in the future. So development is happening at all stages. And we understand that young people need to make sure they have the resources, especially in their schools, in their school libraries. Right now, Oklahoma legislators in the summer, they introduced, Olson introduced a bill to keep conversion therapy legal in Oklahoma. He wants mental health providers who believe they can change your confusion over your sexual orientation. He wants to keep that legal and stop it becoming illegal, while the rest of the country, mental health associations, pediatric schools, every respectable university in the country is condemning it. He wants to keep it legal, and he wants to punish people who try to make it illegal. We
Well,
have
and I
another
mean
bill.
that's happening right now in Oklahoma, and this while Canada throughout the entire country just banned conversion therapy. Now, the very scary thing to me about that bill is not limited to mental health professionals. They
No,
say anybody who is ordained or licensed by a church can do this kind of counseling. Well, that's what we wind up with the idiocy that exists. As you said, every medical organization on the planet has derided this as nothing but snake oil, and it's harmful to young people. And yet here we want to codify that into law that it will remain legal forever and ever and ever. Amen.
so we've introduced also, I just want to take a moment, if you'll give me, we've also introduced a bill, a bathroom bill, punishes
Yep.
schools if they don't, if the school allows a transgender child to be able to use a bathroom that they identify with, they're going to punish them. So we've introduced that bill again. We've introduced a bill that says this was in response back uh, in October when, in a federal court, the Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma settled on a case which would allow the Department of Vital Statistics to start issuing gender non-binary birth certificates. It was decided in a court of law. Our Attorney General settled on that case, and yet we have legislators in October who introduced a bill that says the Department of Vital Statistics can only issue birth certificates for male and female identified persons. So those bills are the four bills that I know that are out there right now that the LGBTQ community. Now, Scott, you and I have been doing this a long time. I've been doing this now for 27 years. And in 27 years, I've never had a legislative session where I didn't have a bill that was targeting the LGBTQ community. The very first one that I had to deal with is in 1995, where they said I could not have joint custody of my kids because I was gay, even though my ex-wife and I had went through a civil lawsuit and decided we were going to have joint custody. They were trying to hurt our family. Well, fortunately, my children, and we were able to kill that bill with the help of Oklahomans for Equality and Cimarron Alliance and PFLAGs from people across the state. But my children are now grown and I have grandchildren, so now it's even more personal. You tried to come after me and tried to keep me from being able to influence my children and raise them, and now you're trying to impact my own grandchildren. And so this is a fight that should be troubling every Oklahoman, regardless of whatever ribbon they wear, whatever county or municipality they find themselves. They need to find reasonable people. When we have educators who have said enough is enough, I'm changing parties and I'm going a different direction because I cannot support the direction this state is going, it is time for people to stand up in every county, every village, and every school board and say, quit using the classroom and the schoolhouse as your battlegrounds.
And this is you could not have stated that more clearly, and I appreciate that. I want to widen this lens a little bit, though, beyond LGBTQ folks and our families. Consider this. I'm talking to our viewers right now. Consider this. What happens if you're a Muslim and then someone says, "Oh, I don't want the Quran in my kid's school." Does that mean that that has to be taken away? Well, this is a slippery slope that gets us nowhere except going back hundreds of years. Because If one person, one parent can decide what an entire school has available for their students, that is not education. That is a setup for disaster. It's a setup for control of our schools by people who don't have the best interest of our children at heart. So when you hear about something like this, please don't think that it's limited to LGBTQ folks, because it's not. This kind of thinking is warped, it's perverse, and frankly, it's put up by someone who has a history of doing this performative kind of legislation just to get his name in the paper.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's disgusting when we have trouble finding enough teachers to teach in our schools because we have to issue emergency certificates, and yet we're wanting to put a bounty, a $10,000 a day bounty on our
yeah.
educators and our brave librarians who are really roughing it up, trying to make sure they have the right resources available in our schools. So call them out, call it what it is. It's target practice, and marginalized communities across the state, they've decided they're going to put you in their bullseye.
And this is right now, you notice that I haven't given you a call to action on this, folks, because the legislative session does not begin for another 3 weeks. But believe me when I tell you that the Oklahoma Democratic Party will let you know who is sponsoring these bills and why and how you need to call your legislators regularly to oppose this kind of thing. Because think about this for a moment. If we provide our children in Oklahoma with a subpar education, and this is, I am not talking about teachers, I'm not talking about school administrators or librarians, or I'm talking about the stranglehold that legislators put on education. If we allow that to happen to our children, then they will not get into a good college because they don't have a well-rounded education. And if they do get into a college or a trade school or any kind of higher learning, they will be around people who have a knowledge base, who have more opportunities because they got a better education than what's being provided here. It's time, Toby, for legislators to get out of the education business and let educators do their job.
Well, it's time for Oklahoma legislators to quit impeding the professionals. Everything from our hospitals to our high schools, they're trying to impede professionals who are certified, licensed. Many of them graduated from our finest state universities, where we have poured millions of dollars to make sure that we had licensed, educated, certified, well-trained people in every areas of our communities. And yet we just keep introducing legislation that wants to punish the people that we raised up and educated to be able to serve our communities.
And we want that knowledge, we want that experience, we want those folks to stay in Oklahoma because this is their home. This is where they were educated. This is where they can continue to make a difference. But if we continue with this kind of harassment, this kind of threat to educators, who in the world would want to come here to be a teacher?
Yeah.
I know I wouldn't. My sister-in-law has been a teacher in public school for 40 years, close to it. And I see the sacrifices that she makes in her classroom for her students. It doesn't matter what school she has worked at or what grade she's taught. She has given of herself so selfishly. Thankfully, we have some Democrats who are educators, John Waldron, Melissa Provenzano, who are educators, and they can look at this and say, hold on a minute. But it's going to take more than two. It's going to take all of us working together to stop this kind of thing in its tracks, because we are looking at a danger zone that once it's opened, once this kind of Pandora's box is open, there's no going back. And We can't afford that, Toby. We can't afford that for the LGBTQ community. We can't afford it for young people in Oklahoma, and certainly it does not portend well for our near or long-term future. So I want you to know, and the folks at OKEQ, that the Democratic Party is not going to be silent on these or any issues that have a negative impact on Oklahomans, because you all do such amazing work at the Capitol. I mean, I swear that there are some times when it seems like you're at the Capitol more than legislators are. But I do want to remind all of us that this is Stitt's party. He is the one who said binary people don't exist. It's not even a real thing.
Yeah, and he used the
And
Bible to do that, and I just told I thought to myself, I thought, well, that's not very smart for him to do that, because that shows he's not reading his Bible, because Jesus has already told us when we get to heaven, nobody's going to be lifting your skirts to look at your privates. We're going to be like the angels. And he says in the kingdom of God, there's no male or female. So we're all headed towards being non-binary in the future, because that's what we're told in the future. In heaven, that's what it's supposed to be like. So they need to read their own scriptures if they're going to use the Bible to defend their reasons to be mean to people.
yeah, and frankly, I've never found too many good excuses in the Bible to harm anybody
No,
else.
no.
My friend, I can't believe the time is gone, but we're out of time. I want to thank you. I'm going to ask, because you have a unique perch to watch this kind of legislation. And of course, you and I will stay in touch, but I'm going to ask you to plan on coming back to join us after the session begins, so that we're all made aware of where things are and how things are
Absolutely.
progressing.
I know I can count on the Democrats to run with the flag of justice. I know I can count on the Democrats in Oklahoma to run with the flag of justice.
That's a promise. Toby Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll look forward to seeing you real soon, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay, I heard in my voice, I got rather animated, but this is something that we all need to be animated about. It's something we all need to be concerned about, and frankly, it's something we all need to be angry about. We cannot play with our children's lives, and that's what this kind of legislation does. Banning books. What's next? An approved reading list put out by the state legislature that's all our kids can read? Well, stay tuned, because we will be providing you with plenty more information on bills as the legislative session approaches, because that means all of us have a responsibility to reach out to our legislators, Republicans or Democrats, and make our voices known. Friends, you've been great to be with us this evening. I certainly do appreciate you being here. Next week, a very special tribute to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and a look at why his legacy remains so very strong today. Until then, this crazy COVID times, I know, has everyone concerned. So make sure you take care of yourselves and your families, and just hang on right now, because I do believe that this is going to be a better year each day that goes by. From all of us at the Hamilton Report and the Oklahoma Democratic Party, I thank you so much for being with us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again next week, right here at 6:30 on the Hamilton Report. Good night.